welcome. Just noting that we are recording this session. Welcome to all of the candidates and to the participants who've joined us online. And before we go any further, I really want to acknowledge country. I think we're all in our different rooms and desks and verandas on Gumbaynggirr country, one of the most really beautiful parts of the world. And we want to acknowledge and pay our respects to the custodians of this land and elders past and present. I need to let you know we're having a very bellow moment at the Sustainability Centre. A group of young people have just wandered onto the veranda for their afternoon fun. So I think they might just be leaving us. But as we reflect on our acknowledgement of country, today we're really talking about housing and land use. And land use has been something that Gumbaynggirr people have paid great attention to, our environment and the beautiful part of the earth that we're lucky enough to live on since time immemorial, really. So that's an important way for us to start. This is the first time that the Housing Matters Action Group has hosted a Meet the Candidates forum online. This is the first time that we have run a webinar. We've had a number of practices over the last couple of days, but I ask you please to be kind to us. And if you've got more expertise than us and you can see something that we're doing that's not quite right, please let us know in the chat. And please be kind to each other during the next hour and a half. Housing's a very emotive issue. It's complex and everybody needs it. We're really keen to create the space for considered and respectful discussion this afternoon. And it's really important that we all get an understanding of the candidates' perspectives and views on this important topic as we move towards the Bellingen Shire Council election. And we ask that everybody keeps it nice. Just in terms of process, we invited the mayoral candidates and the next person on their ticket to join this event. And for independent tickets, we invited the first person on the ticket. And this is because we think it's really important that we all hear what the people who are most likely to be at the decision-making table think. There was a last-minute change today with Jo Brotherton, who's second on the Waterfall Way ticket, needing to give her apologies due to a competing priority. And after some lengthy consideration, we've agreed that number 3 on the ticket, Ellie Tree, is taking her place. Welcome, Ellie. To kick off, we're going to invite everybody to make an opening statement with the mayoral candidates going first, and then that'll be followed by the people who are standing as councillors. We're following the ballot paper order to kick us off, both with opening remarks and with the questions, and then we'll rotate through the questions using that order, so everyone gets a chance to go first. We've got 5 questions that we've compiled following a request to our Housing Matters contact list, which is over a couple of hundred people. And then if everyone keeps to time, we think that there'll be enough time for an additional 3 questions from the floor, and we wrap up at 7. In terms of our attendees and everyone who's online, we are all over Zoom. We decided to make this online because we really wanted it to be an inclusive event and didn't want to have to deal with the double vax issue. But we know that people are a bit sick of Zoom, so we're really wanting to make it as participative as possible. We encourage people who have joined us, and we think there are about 65 people online at the moment, to please use the chat function right throughout, including the emojis, which you'll find on the right hand of your chat screen. If you've got questions that you want to put in to be asked after the first round of questions, please use the Q&A function, which you'll also find at the bottom of your screen. And we've got 2 people who are managing both of those chat lines. They'll review the questions and then pass them on to me, and we'll try and bring like topics together. And I'm wrapping up with my opening remarks, but I just want to say, just in case you're not in the right meeting, this isn't a meeting with the candidates about social housing and homelessness. Of course, we really care about those things, but this is a discussion about the housing crisis for locals and how to create housing options for people on local incomes so that they can continue to live in this shire. You might have seen the Domain article this week. Bellingen has had the second highest growth in real estate in New South Wales in the past 12 months. The cost of houses jumped a massive 38% in the last year. We've crunched the numbers, and regular working people who live and work here right across the Shire haven't got a hope of buying or renting on the private rental market without being in terrible housing stress. We all know that, and that's why we're here. So with that, I warmly welcome our candidates. It's really great that so many of you could come. We also have an apology from Stephen Glyde, who's heading an independent ticket. He asked me to let you know that he did have another commitment, but that he's very supportive of anything that council can do to improve housing options for locals. And he then went on to tell me about things that he's doing personally in his own life in that regard. Jo Cook, also another independent candidate, was invited, but she declined to attend. All of the other candidate tickets are here tonight, and we warmly welcome you. And with that, I invite all of the candidates to introduce themselves and tell us why they're standing and what they want to do. And I'd like to start by handing over to Dominic King, our current Mayor and Greens candidate.
Afternoon, everyone. I'd also like to start by acknowledging that we are meeting today on Gumbaynggirr country, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. And also, reflect on what this would have looked like when the First Nations people were here, and I'm sure that everyone had a home then, that people were cared for, and also that they are now one of the groups that have the highest rates of housing stress in the country, and that's pretty diabolical. And that was before the crisis that we've seen now. I'd also like to acknowledge my fellow councillor, Councillor Jennie Fenton, the Deputy Mayor, who's been involved in this space for the whole time we were here, and she's probably more of an expert on this this topic than I am, and certainly is very passionate about that. It is a real issue for us, as it is across the country, and I think we are seeing our own friends and our own family not being able to find anywhere to live, and skyrocketing rents, and people having to move away. And as Kerry mentioned, a lot of people who are working can't even get into the housing market. So it is an absolutely huge issue, and it is right across the country. And local government usually does not play in this space, and we had those conversations very, very early with the Housing Action Group that, even though that is the case, and I know many mayors across this region have said to me, "Why are you getting involved in that? That's not our bread and butter." And I said, "Well, look, we are the closest form of government to the people, and we understand the issues. We live in the community. We're part of that community, and we actually don't have a choice in whether we respond to this or not." So we went on that journey ourselves about, how do we address, what can we do, what levers can we pull? And I think it has been a really, really interesting probably 4 years around this. And, I'd certainly take my hat off to the Housing Matters Action Group, because what we do need in local government now is partnerships with the community. And, the forums that were pulled together by this group, where we had an opportunity to listen to experts who, they do this as a career, was a great eye-opener, but also gave me some hope that we could do some stuff as local government. And we've started that process. We are in a conversation with the Freemasons, who are on board with their Watson Street conversion into housing for single women, which is the biggest need in this shire. The federal government has committed funding to that, and we're just waiting for the state government to come on board, and that project can take off. So I think that's a really, really good step forward. We've also set aside some of the land that we own, and spoken about how we could use that as affordable housing, or to be able to offer that up to people who would like to take that on, because it is something that there's no expertise in local government about. So
you've hit your 3 minutes, Dom.
Where am I up to?
You're up to 3. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Did you hear the warning?
No.
No. Okay, so we'll figure the warning out a bit better. Sorry about that. Thank you. I'd like to then hand over to the next speaker on the list, Andrew Woodward from Labor.
Hey, Kerry. Good day, everyone. Thanks for taking an interest in this issue this evening. And first of all, let me start off by saying that the housing issue needs more action, more homes, more jobs, and more intervention from state and federal governments. And this is a top priority for me and Labor. So first of all, I'd like to congratulate the Housing Matters Action Group for the fantastic work they've done pulling this together, not only tonight, but also in recent years. And I'll start off by committing that Labor will look to fund the Housing Matters Action Group to a six-figure value if we're elected, so that they can develop a fully fledged NGO in the years ahead. Labor's position is a very simple one. Everyone deserves a home. And my personal view and Labor's view is that housing is a human rights issue. In terms of the welfare of our people, to me, this is up there in a public policy sense with the same gravity as climate change. It's also an interesting issue for the reasons that Dom said, that a lot can be done and a lot can't be done, and much of it lies within the federal and state government policy purview, but I'm not giving up whatsoever. Today, I want to stick to what local government can do, and we commend the current council for listening to the community on this issue. Labor's approach and where it fits in is that we want to keep people safe is a general comment during when we're in council. A house makes you safe. That's a really simple point. We also need to turn things around in this community. We've lost jobs and revenue through tourism under the Greens and the Independents. We also have to prepare for the future. You know, housing, climate and visitation. Housing is the number one issue there. And we've also got to protect what's important to us, being our people, our lifestyle and our Indigenous culture. And they're all under threat because of the inaction on housing. The point is that housing touches everything in a policy sense. I get that, and it's a first order for us. Under an elected Labor council, we'd accelerate the implementation of the council's existing local housing strategy. Also, too, we'll provide incentives for appropriate rezoning of land and converting properties. We'll incentivise landlords to offer secondary dwellings and homes at affordable prices. We'll support and seed fund a community land trust. As I said, we'll fund the Housing Matters Action Group to help drive progress and policy in Bellingen Shire and beyond. And we'll also pursue the state and federal governments for a fair share of public housing investment. And just on that point, we are having our own housing forum on the 30th of November at Bellingen Golf Club at 5:30 p.m. Everyone's welcome to come along. We've got the New South Wales Shadow Minister, Rose Jackson, attending in person, and we've got Jason Clare, the Federal Shadow Minister for Housing, attending via video. And so this is a chance for the people of Bellingen and the Housing Matters Action Group and others to talk directly to what will be decision makers in upcoming Labor state and federal governments. And that's one of the advantages of voting Labor, is that we have a direct line to Macquarie Street, a direct line to Parliament House in Canberra, and few others can offer that when it comes to being a party of government. The other thing I want to say is that we're okay with housing development, but we don't support...
We've just hit 3 minutes, Andrew.
Yep. I'll just finish this sentence, Kerry. We don't support housing development at any cost, and we're also opposed to the Heartwood develop in Bellingen. Thanks for listening. Happy to take your questions.
Thanks very much, Andrew, and there'll be time for questions a little bit later. Could you hear the alarm then? Still not. Okay. We'll keep working on it. Sorry. So that brings us to Steve Allan, who's the mayoral candidate from the Waterfall Way Independence Group. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Kerry, and good evening, everyone. I'd also like to acknowledge that wherever we are, we're meeting on Gumbaynggirr country, and pay my deepest respects to the elders of yesterday, those of today, and those of tomorrow. There's no doubt that the great Australian dream of home ownership is without doubt becoming harder to achieve for many, with the diminishing stock of public housing, rental and mortgage stress, the financialisation of housing, interest rates and tax regimes leading to a shortage of affordable housing. This has been described as one of the nation's wicked problems. While these issues have been more extreme in the large sort of metro areas of Sydney and Melbourne, there has been a rising trend in rural areas. And obviously at these local level, the problems have been heightened due to a number of factors that we'll flesh out as we go through this forum today. And I'd like to thank the work of the Housing Matters Action Group for highlighting this in our Shire. Historically, Australian housing policy has afforded only a limited role to local government, and that's one of advocacy, land release, implementation of planning and approval of developments. Something's been, over the last few decades in Bellingen, very slow and very limited. This limited role for local government's been a direct result of the funding framework that exists at all levels of government, where of course local government is the least well-funded tier of government in Australia. This remains the biggest barrier for local government to act in this space. Having said that, we understand that there is a growing body of work around local governments working in partnerships with state and federal governments and with private and not-for-profit sectors to have a significant impact on the affordability of housing. Locally, the work of the Housing Matters Action Group and with the adopted local housing strategy, we've laid down a strong foundation that can make a difference, I believe. There's a lot of work to be done, but it has to be framed within what's affordable and with the resources available to our local government. I mean, is it really possible for a local government to change the market forces that is causing the rise in local government, in local housing rather? What levers are available really for local government to pull that will make a significant impact? Now I'll quote a few stats from a paper that's been published by Morris et al. That's called The Australian Local Governments in Affordable Housing, Challenges and Possibilities, where a number of local governments have started work in this space. Is that my ding? Okay. Well,
Steve, we're up to 3 minutes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Steve. Could you hear the bell then?
Yeah, I did then.
Okay, great, we've got it sorted. Thanks everybody for persevering with us. Like to then thank all of the mayoral candidates for taking the time to talk with us about their views about housing and the council's role, and invite now the people who are standing to be councillors similarly, but with a minute and a half to talk with us about your views about this and what you'd like to achieve. And like to start with Steve Klipin, who's from the Independent Group B. Over to you, Steve. There's many Steves.
Thanks, Kerry. Thank you to the Housing Matters Action Group for organising this, and to the 60+ people who have taken interest in this. As a councillor for 2 terms and 9 years, I'm incredibly proud of the work that we've done, and I thank my fellow councillors Dom and Jenny for the attention that we have managed to develop as a council into this area. It's hard when you're looking around, and around us are councils that don't see this as a space that we have any impact or influence in. And I think to be at the forefront of that is really impressive. To be able to build on that is great. The impressive is not the council, the impressive is the work that comes from the community and council as a partner to it. Steve Allan spoke eloquently about the drivers that are so difficult to change. And I think the 2 main things that I take from what he said and my experience that we have is that council can influence, and there's no other voice that speaks for the whole of the Shire. And those are the 2 things that as we go forward are ours to continue to develop, to continue to strengthen, and continue to find purpose and influence. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And you got there before the bell. We've just decided to try it without the headphones. Can you still hear me? Great, thanks. Thanks very much, Steve. And I'd like to pass on now to Jennie Fenton, who, as people have said, has had a long-standing involvement in this work.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. I just and hi everyone. I guess I wanted to start with a little bit of history of why I got so involved in housing matters when it's not strictly the sort of core business of council. And I guess I saw, firstly, I had a history of housing stress growing up. We lived in, I think, over 30 different rental situations, and some of them would be described as anything but acceptable housing by modern standards, you know, including tents and that kind of thing. So I guess I've always had a big interest and a big understanding of what it does to you when you're under stress, housing stress. And then in this community, seeing over the last decade the changes in, you know, even key workers who earn a decent wage being able to actually live here, and the impacts of that in addition to all those other kind of players. But I guess the big one that's been front and centre for my family has been that we have a complete absence of accessible housing. And by that I mean, you know, to the large majority of people who live with physical disabilities. So I guess I'm seeing this baby boomer wave coming, and how completely unprepared we are as a community, particularly Bellingen, not as much Urunga and Dorrigo, who have much more flatter areas. So I guess I've come to that, but I've also seen this incredible energy in the community for, you know, we've got one of the long-standing and very successful co-op models. We were one of the last councils to allow multiple occupancies, and we are one of the last two in the state that do. You know, we've got tiny house builders on every corner. Everyone's having a go at being creative around different solutions, and I think that we really care about each other. So I got very... Sorry?
That was your bell, Jenny.
First one or second one?
The second one.
Oh, okay.
Want to finish your sentence?
That'd be great. I got very educated by participating in conferences, forums, and talking to people, got proximal to what the issues are, got very educated and around the different models, and I'd like to talk about some of those tonight.
Great, thank you. And I'm really sorry we're having so much trouble with the bell. We tested this yesterday and it was all working fine. So I'm not quite sure what else to do to give people a warning. If anyone has some good ideas, can you let me know? Waving. If I wave.
What about waving?
Yeah, okay. So if people look for the waving, and I'll go one, and then I'll go, that's it. How's that sound? Okay, beauty. We've still got Bellingen Youth on the veranda at the Sustainability Centre, so we've got a few things happening here. Okay, so thank you, Jenny, and I'm really pleased to welcome Paul Hemphill, who's a candidate from the Labor group, to have a talk with us. I can't see Paul. And you're muted, Paul. You need to unmute yourself. Can someone do this? Paul, you're still on mute. That's it.
I'm off now.
Okay.
Okay, good evening. Hi, gang. A bit of history about myself, long history. I live in Urunga, but way back in the day, my family and I, and also Paul Mullally, our Dorrigo teammate in this election, we were all raised in subsidised housing, low rent and well-maintained houses. We owed our family home and also our health and education, and hence our progress in life, to the what we call the 4 pillars of Labor values, which are free health, free education, jobs, and also subsidised houses. I'm a long-time social democrat, and I believe in the importance of social services, community, equality, and social justice. And I believe that everyone, no matter what they are, have the right to security and peace of mind and a safe, comfortable and affordable home. It's a matter of equity and fairness. It's a matter of health and well-being, and also of dignity and self-esteem. To reverse an old phrase by Margaret Thatcher, we are a society, not an economy.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Paul. Thanks very much.
Here.
And I think we've got the hand signals right. Thanks for bearing with us, everybody. And I'm pleased to now hand over for the last of these opening remarks to Ellie Tree from the Waterfall Way team.
Thanks, Kerry. Hey, everyone. So I am one of the key workers in the Bellingen Shire who lost my rental during the housing crisis. Lucky enough to now have found somewhere that we can call home in Urunga. So I empathise with and understand what it's like to not be able to afford to live where you work or where your children go to school. I'm probably one of the more lucky ones who was lucky enough to actually find somewhere else still within the Shire and close enough to work. I have a pretty extensive history working in the housing and homelessness space, mostly in Coffs Harbour and with the Nambucca Valley Council, with the recovery response with the Black Summer bushfires. And just to follow on from the article that Steve was talking about, it's this mega article, I think it was 2019, and it was one of the largest studies done on local governments and their perceptions of what they can do in response to affordable housing. And the biggest thing that stood out to me that I actually did get to experience myself as a volunteer is that as long as everybody, the Housing Matters Action Group, the community who need housing, the community who are there to lend a hand, the people who can volunteer to provide materials or labour for free, whatever it is, as well as local government, state government and federal government, if everybody can work together in the capacity that they have, that's when we see real change. And that's what we hope to do should we be elected, is everything within the means of what we can provide.
Great.
Thanks, Kerry.
Thanks, Ellie. Thanks for that. And thanks for mentioning that study. I think that we were part of that study, and the lead researcher came and spoke at one of our forums. So that's a nice little link back to that. And Steve Klipin, sorry, I've got a few people giving me things from side to side. We're now on to question 1. And we're starting the process of rotating through the order. So we're going to start this question with Steve Klipin, and he'll have a minute, but actually that's not the case. We've changed this. So sorry. What we're doing is asking the mayoral candidates to respond to this question first, and then we'll slip back to the people who aren't the mayoral candidates. But we really wanted to hear particularly from the mayoral candidates about this question. And then it's up to you how on your teams you choose to answer the rest of them. So the question is, what do you think the drivers are of the current housing crisis? What do you think local government's role is in responding to this crisis? And if elected, what do you think council should do about it? So we'll go down the list again, starting with Dominic King. Then we'll go on to Andrew and Steve and back to Steve Klipin. So Dominic, over to you for a minute.
Yeah, look, the first part's a very tough question, isn't it? I mean, the driver is obviously the system. I think we've all spoken about that. We need a better way of providing affordable housing and social housing. And there's many countries in the world that do it. The Scandinavians do it the best. You know, it's maybe not that ownership model shouldn't be the only answer, which is the case here. Local government's role, I think we've demonstrated what local government's role is, and that's partnership with the community and listening to what's there. And I think the third really important thing is the advocacy. And certainly my role as the elected representative on the Local Government New South Wales board has given me some insight, and I've had conversations with the planning minister, Minister Stokes, about things like Airbnb and how that's a real issue, because we've approved, we've taken the fees off secondary dwelling. But it's still counted as hosted. Is that it?
Jeez. Got a minute.
You've got to be like a auctioneer.
Yeah, but I think you were very comprehensive. Thanks, Dominic. And that takes us to Andrew.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Kerry. So look, I've got a list here of 20 things that contribute to the housing crisis in Australia. I'm not going to bang through those. I'll just deal with some local issues. First of all, the biggest issue we have coming up with the housing crisis here is the Coffs Harbour bypass. We've got a 5-year project with a lot of workers coming into the area. That's going to accentuate the crisis here. We've also got an ageing population. We've got really high unemployment under the Nationals, and we've got stagnant wages under the Nationals as well. From my point of view, local government has a big role to play. That's in planning, rezoning, utilising land, bringing the community together, and also to providing incentives. And I must say what's becoming clear in this campaign already is that ourselves, and I think the Greens as well, have plans. And I'm really disappointed to hear the Urunga Chamber of Commerce Party and the Dorrigo Chamber of Commerce Party basically giving up on the housing issue, throwing their hands in the air and saying that not much can be done. I don't agree with that 100%.
Thanks, Andrew. And that's a handover, Steve. Allan, to you.
Thanks very much. As far as the drivers go, I think they've been discussed already. We don't have enough time to go over it again. As far as what I've just heard, that's a great example of why you don't want party politics in local government, because who wants to hear that sort of dribble when we're supposed to be having a polite conversation? So in terms of what can be done, I'd like to say that I think the Watson Street development is a great initiative and will definitely be something that should be supported. But the fact of the matter is, you can say you're going to provide incentives, you're going to do this and to do that, but if you do not have the resources to do it without taking away from other key areas of local council priority for the ratepayers and the residents, then it's just air, I'm sorry, and nobody should take it seriously.
Thanks, Steve. And we'd also like to hear from the councillors on this question, the people who are standing for councillors. So let's go back up to Steve Klipin.
Thanks, Kerry. I'm going to go to the heart of the question, or maybe the tail. If elected, what do you think council should do? I've got three topics in what council should do. Advocate. Let's advocate at every level that we can: state, federal, regional development, Australia, any body that has influence on the structural stuff. Secondly, liaise with stakeholders, liaise with community. And let's be clear that community is not a single monolithic group. There are different views within the community on exactly what should be done, and managing and helping to contextualize those, that liaison is important. And the last is influence, and influence wherever we can. And council does have opportunity to influence in the area of development and so on and so forth. And those are the three things: advocate, liaise, and influence.
Thanks very much, Steve. And we've now heard from all of the tickets who are participating today on their views about the drivers of the housing crisis, and most importantly, the role of local government. So we are going to move on to the next question. And we're going to start with Andrew and work through the list from Andrew down in the order of the ballot paper. The Council's Homes for Our Future discussion paper was launched at our initial housing forum in 2018. We had over 120 people at that forum. And following on from there was a detailed consultation process that resulted in the adopted Bellingen Shire Local Housing Strategy 2020 to 2040. And that's designed to guide our housing and planning process for the coming decades. We're really interested in what your view is about the Bellingen Shire Local Housing Strategy, and what do you see as the key opportunities, and is there anything you would change? So Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. I was there in 2018.
Paul, sorry,
okay.
Sorry, I have made a process error. It's anyone from your ticket. Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I'll answer that. So thank you very much. Yeah, I was at that housing strategy meeting in 2018, and it was an excellent forum. It got a lot of attention. It was great to see a lot of outsiders taking a lot of interest in it. But great work, which has my 100% support, but what it needs is implementation. The biggest problem with Bellingen Council is, and it's not just in housing, they do all these awesome pieces of work, but they don't do anything to implement them, or rarely do they do anything to implement them. So what we want to do is take the handbrake off council and get some action. And some of the worries that we have in relation to some of the, the issues that were identified. Obviously, climate change is one locally that will have an impact on the housing. Secondly, we're also concerned about the lack of insurance that will come toward homeowners for fires and floods. And also, too, we're concerned about the lack of appropriate standards. We'd like to see some more work done in that regard. So overall, the strategy's in place. It's just got to have some action now and someone to drive it. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Waterfall Way candidates, who'd like to take this question?
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. Look, there's some great things in the local housing strategy. The emphasis on infill development and subdividing existing blocks so that towns grow around the town centre, I think is really great. There's challenges definitely around the DA approval processes and the contributions required, to make that happen. for the existing homeowners to really be incentivised to do it. But I think there's a lot of merit in that work there. As far as implementation goes, obviously I agree with that. You know, there needs to be action on the action plan. It's been difficult as always in COVID, but it needs to happen. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Steve. And moving on to Steve Klipin.
Thank you, Kerry. Look, the Bellingen Shire Housing Strategy is a really terrific document, and it's terrific because of the way it's been built. Anybody who thinks that the implementation happens from one day to the next, I think is belying the complexity of the issue. And again, I go back and stand on the record that I have achieved with the other two councillors during this session of council to really drive this to the forefront of what we're doing. And that goes to the heart of the partnership that we've been working with the Housing Action Group. And for that, I doff my cap to you guys again and say, this is what we need to continue with. We as council do not, I repeat, do not have all the answers.
Great. Thanks, Steve. And I'm getting my head really confused with the Steves and Steves, but we are going now back to the Greens. Not sure who'd like to speak to this question.
That's me, Kerry.
Jenny? Great.
Yep. Yeah, I think the key opportunities are around obviously progressing the implementation. I'd like to clarify, as I did the other night in Urunga, that we have commenced implementation of the strategy, very much so, and a number of the things picked up in the strategy, because the process was long, had already been well established and well underway. So I guess, you know, we've started pilots, we've formed partnerships that have started pilots. We made a decision in council to maintain the waiving of fees for granny flat applications and, you know, the secondary dwelling stuff. So there's a range of stuff that's already kicked off, and including the advocacy around that changed funding model. So there's lots started and there's lots that needs to be started. I think that anything to change, the consultation was one of the most comprehensive ever and won an award statewide for planning. So I wouldn't change anything other than to get stuck in.
Right. Thanks, Jenny. And thanks to all of you. Have I missed anybody in that question? This is I have to just say across the group of everybody who's here tonight, this is a very stilted way for us to be doing this. We're used to being together and being able to see each other and talk. And I hope that people are getting what you came for in terms of information from this, and I'll look forward to the time when we can all be together in the same room. But thank you. I think we're making a remarkably good stab of it. It gets us on then to our third question, and really encourage people to use the chat function. That is a good way that the people who are, I can see a little bit of chat, people who are watching can participate through the chat. This is a really important question. We're all really concerned about escalating housing costs and the difficulties for locals to find secure housing, both in terms of buying and renting. This is having an increasing impact on local employers who are unable to attract, in many cases, and retain staff, and we've heard a number of stories in that regard. How can we ensure housing for people on local wages? And I'll hand first to the Waterfall Way team. So that's...
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Great.
So I think, first of all, creating the local housing strategy was a great first step, identifying what the demand is, what the housing market is, what the supply is like, where the gaps are, examining affordable housing, identifying areas where there's potential for more growth. I think it's really fantastic to look at things like infill, the incentives that local government can use in terms of planning and rezoning, as well as on a really basic level lobbying to, you know, state and federal governments to look at independent evaluations on Commonwealth Rent Assistance Plan. Obviously, it's pretty common for that, the middle ground of people who earn just too much money for receiving support with things, but not quite enough to cover their whole housing costs. Yeah.
And thanks, Ellie. So we move now to Steve Klipin.
Thanks. I think the word here that's too difficult to contemplate is ensure. I don't think that we can ensure housing for people on local wages. We can influence outcomes, but we certainly can't ensure. The structural issues related to housing are far bigger than what our council can achieve in the short term. In the longer term, perhaps not. So I'd like to change that that verb to how can we influence that there will be housing for people on local wages, and that is through the same three methods that I described earlier of advocate, liaise, and influence. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. That brings us to the Greens, to Dominic or Jennie.
Yeah, that's me again. I think that the primary thing we have to do is to facilitate new ideas and old ideas done better. And that's very much what we've been looking at with, for example, community title. So community title is the modern version of multiple occupancy. So we're finding what are the problems in those older models and how can we make them better. So we've already kicked that off in terms of the process of converting a number of those into established multiple occupancies into community title, and pursuing opportunities to trial new types of models. So that's very much at the crux. We don't need more land releases. We've got so much land release that is being sat on and speculated upon for a variety of reasons, but that's the reality of it. You know, we really need to be looking at the things like where, you know, someone lodges boarding houses.
Jennie, looking away.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
That'll be the minute.
I just heard the boarding house word as you were looking away. Thanks. And that'll get us to the ALP ticket. So Andrew or Paul.
Our Labor plan is full of detail on what we would explore as to ensure that people on low wages were helped. But long story short, it hinges around the need to incentivise landowners and also landlords to offer secondary dwellings and other affordable rents to people on lower wages. I think it's a question of supply and demand, and it's a big problem basically to provide a variety of houses for people of all walks of life, of all stages in life. It's a big task.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And I think, you know, for many people, this is the question, isn't it? What can we do as a community to find a way through this really complex, wicked problem to mean that we can have a supply of houses, safe, secure houses that local people who work here can live in? Take the point, the word ensure was a bit probably not quite right, because we don't have all the drivers at the local level, far from it. But it's probably the biggest question for us in this coming period, is how do we find a way for local people to be able to live here and work here? Which brings us to the next question. We've got two more questions, and then we've got questions from the floor. So I hope that those people who are at home are comfortable with a cuppa or a nice glass of crisp white, which we're all looking forward to. We're very concerned about escalating housing costs and the difficulty for locals to find secure housing, both in terms of buying or renting, and we've been talking about that. I'm asking the right question, aren't I? Question 4. Sorry, I was asking you the question you've just answered. This also is a really important question. The housing strategy, which we've talked about, identifies a community land trust as a potential shared ownership model, and that speaks to some of the things you just some of you just spoke about. And that could improve the supply of affordable housing for local people. The Mid-North Coast Joint Organisations of Council has recently commissioned a proof of concept with a lot of advocacy and support from us, our group, to seriously investigate the establishment of a community land trust locally. On council, would you support the establishment of a community land trust, and would you transfer council-owned land to it if the proof of concept project demonstrates viability? If yes, why? If no, what do you propose as an alternative way to increase the supply of affordable housing for locals? And that takes us to Steve Klipin, who's kicking off.
Thanks, Kerry, again. In terms of an alternative way to increase supply of affordable housing, I think this is one of the really terrific issues. I know that I have spent quite some time talking with a number of people on the housing alliance in really trying to work through this and understand it. And again, I go back to the point that I made earlier that Council is one of the few organisations that has umbrella responsibility within the Shire and can actually influence this kind of thing. And all the time that we've got a council that is moving towards us diligently and facilitating the conversation to better outcomes, that's where we move towards.
Steve, you didn't actually answer the part of the question, which was, would you support a community land trust?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right, thank you. So over to the Greens.
I'm going to answer that one, Kerry. Look, absolutely support community land trust. I've actually done interviews with the ABC about how much I think this is a great opportunity for local government to be involved, even when we have planners coming to us or developers talking about that we could set some of that land aside. It allows people that can afford to build a house but can't afford land and houses to actually get into the market. I think it's a great concept. I think the government should have picked it up already. I'm part of the JO that's pushed for this study to happen, so I'm absolutely on board with community land trust.
Great, thanks, Dominic. Which brings us to Labor.
Our answer would be a big yes, because we reckon it would serve a variety of critical needs. The long-term stewardship of safe, affordable housing in the Shire. It would prevent the displacement of vulnerable residents. It would enable the economic inclusion of different socioeconomic groups and create pathways for low-income essential workers, particularly to gain tenure and also dignity in housing. That is our policy.
Right, thanks, Paul. Which brings us to the Waterfall Way candidates and the community land trust question.
Well, I believe it's a great concept. Of course it is. There's a difference between whether I can give support to the study, which I do, and whether I can say I support establishing it, because at the moment we don't know the detail. We don't know the what, we don't know the who could live there, how many can live there, who makes those choices. So we need to know those details before we could definitively say, yes, we support the establishment of it. So that's my answer.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. So we've got a lot of eggs in the community land trust basket, and we're very hopeful that the proof of concept project will answer the sorts of questions that Steve Allan just raised. Which brings us to the last of the first round of questions. And it's a pretty big one. There's often a tension between economic, social, and environmental dynamics in the housing space. Council has a significant role to play in navigating this territory. If you were on council, how would you prioritise these competing interests in your decision-making related to housing and development matters? And we're kicking off with the Greens.
Yeah, I think while councils do have a big role, it's kind of this very constrained space legislatively for councils to support the community and the doers. The main way that we need to do that, I've experienced this through education, and I think that the housing hub concept linked to a resilience hub to enable people to understand their options and the models that are available is the most powerful tool that we have available in our future. I think that we've got one of the most complex planning systems in the world, and there's a real we need to be able to have a space where people can identify the incentives to do the right thing, like water tanks, which we've done through grants and things in the past. So we've got the tools, and thank you. Sorry.
Thanks, Jennie. Thank you. That brings us to the ALP, prioritising these competing interests in decision making.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much. So to me, this is all about leadership. This is all about driving and delivering projects, which is something I've done throughout all of my career. It also comes from the philosophical base of wanting to actually do something. This is all about caring. This is all about listening. And, this is all about, partnering with state and federal governments. And we're prepared to give anything a go just to see if it can work. And I think more than anything else, this is all about, quite simply, just giving a damn. And we give a damn. We won't be leaving anyone behind, nor will Paul Hemphill, nor will Paul Mullally, and nor will Danielle. And we're not giving up on this issue. We believe that there's plenty of intervention that Bellingen Shire Council can do to assist with the housing issue.
Right. Thanks. Andrew, right on the knocker. Waterfall Way, I meant that in terms of timing, by the way. Just add a bit of humour. Waterfall Way candidates.
Thanks, Kerry. So to answer the question, social, environmental and economic dynamics I see as the pillars of our local character, and I think prioritising the competing interests includes identifying and acknowledging any and all areas that have significant cultural or environmental meaning in order to respect and enhance our local character, while also ensuring that we strike that balance to make sure that the current housing needs to alleviate the crisis and the infrastructure increase that's needed and maintenance can be met to support our community. So integrating the factors, the social factors, access, housing, heritage, culture, community facilities with environmental factors, open space, comfort, topography, with the economic factors, local employment, parking and roads is essential as a combination to ensure the dynamics create a resilient, responsive, integrated solution. And this can be done by consistently reviewing the local housing strategy alongside the social plan and other council plans that identify the demographic data, human needs assessments and identification of priority initiatives.
Thanks, Ellie. And over to you, Steve Klipin.
Thank you again. As a councillor for 9 years plus, I've been in a number of meetings that we've had to use the wisdom of the sages to try and find a way through these things. They're not simple. Anybody who believes that just giving it a go, thinking that there are easy answers, will be sorely disappointed. My way of working through these things on a case-by-case basis, using intelligent, informed leadership, sometimes looking for the nuance rather than the cudgel to make a statement about how to move forward. This is a nuanced, no easy answer area, but a commitment to housing is basic, and so is a commitment to the environment.
Thank you, Steve. It is, I've sat in council over the years watching councillors make decisions where there are these competing interests, and I can't imagine actually being in that discussion and in that role from time to time when it's been such a complex, tricky decision and juggling act with no easy answers. So that brings us to the end of our prepared questions. And we've got time, I think, for 3 questions from the floor, possibly more, which is great. We're doing really well for time. I'm really grateful that everyone has stuck to time. the first question, and so please keep throwing things into the Q&A just in case there is time for more than 3. The first question really speaks to a pretty live issue currently in Bellingen, and relates to a matter like the question we just asked you, actually, in terms of a development. So there's been a lot of discussion about the Heartwood development at the top of Endeavour Drive in Bellingen, and we'd really like to hear what you think about this matter. And we're going to start with, so we're going to go Labor, Waterfall Way, Steve Klipin and the Greens. That's where we're up to in the cycle. So over to you, Labor.
Okay, I will basically quote from a press release that our mayoral candidate put out, which makes our position pretty unequivocal. I will quote from it. Labor does not support the Endeavour Drive rezoning and proposed Heartwood precinct subdivision because we consider it an unsafe development on the fire-prone ridge where there are bushfire containment and community evacuation difficulties. Further, the proposal is risky with many significant associated adverse social and environmental impacts and has the potential to permanently and adversely alter the character and culture of the locality. That is our official policy.
Well, that was pretty clear. Thank you, Paul. And we'll move on then to Waterfall Way.
Thanks, Kerry. Look, I believe that a lot of local residents have understood for a long time that that land would probably be developed. I think the problem is around the current concept plan, the extent of the development there. It's not in keeping with the rural residential blocks that adjoin it in Endeavour Drive. I can't see in its current form that I could, I understand it has to go out to community consultation. I'll be listening very closely to hear what comes back from that. But in its current form, it doesn't seem to me to be a good fit for the rest of Bellingen.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Which brings us to the next Steve. Steve Klipin.
Thanks, Kerry. I understand that there is there are planning issues with this development. This development, which we passed through council based on the advice and on the comments from residents local and further away about this development. And so the planning process is running its course at the moment, and there will be the opportunity, not so much from my understanding for community consultation, but for further opportunity when the DA is fully lodged.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Which brings us to the Greens.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. We're not, we're really at the beginning of this process because it's only talking about whether it's feasible from a number of perspectives, the state government, the RFS. So it's going to the RFS now, and then it comes back to council and then to community consultation. So I guess we're elected councillors right now, we can't have a decision made. It's illegal to have a decision made about something that's coming, that's not before council yet. You can't make up your mind before you're there. So I guess we're at a slight disadvantage. We can't claim to be, pro or con. We have to trust the process, particularly the part about listening to the community and the RFS about the fire issues and all the players, about this, because it certainly there's opportunities in this potential development, but there's also risks. So we have to sort of get all the information before we can form a view. That's your role as a councillor. You can't hit the ground ready to make a decision without having all the information in front of you.
Thanks, Jenny. And I think from the Housing Matters Action Group perspective, we don't come to decisions about particular DAs. The only DA we have got particularly involved in was one that was earmarked for affordable housing specifically. But we do know that any new development is challenging, and somehow or other we need to find a way to navigate the sort of issues we're all talking about to increase housing supply. And there's some serious community conversations for us to have around how we do that. Which brings us to question 2. And it wasn't even there you go. My comment wasn't even a deliberate lead into this question, but it's my understanding that one of the key strategies in the housing strategy is a focus on infill housing. What strategies or plans do the candidates have to increase the capacity of local infrastructure to enable infill across the Shire? So that is a pretty topical question. We did get questions on the issue of infrastructure and infill that didn't make it into the short list initially. So clearly it's running as an issue for people, and we're really interested in your views about that. So we'll start with Waterfall Way.
I wonder, Kerry, could you put the question in the chat?
Yep, that's a great idea. Someone's just about to do that, Steve. Do you want me to read the question again?
Yes,
Yep.
please.
One of the key strategies in the local housing strategy is a focus on infill housing. This question's asking what plans the candidates have to increase the capacity of local infrastructure like water and sewerage, for example, or curbs and guttering, to enable infill across the Shire. And we're starting with the Waterfall Way ticket. So we're going Waterfall Way, Steve, Klipin, Greens and Labor. And I think we've typed it into the chat.
Thanks, Kerry. So we've identified, these sorts of local priorities as being, of the utmost importance. So things like completing the sewage program and the coastal villages sewage program have to be high on the agenda because the Urunga treatment works upgrade is a part of that. Water security is a big issue for everyone across the Shire. I think there's a lack of communication at the moment about where we are with that. So that's something we also will prioritise if we're elected to council. And curbs and gutters, roads, that's core council activities. It needs to be resourced, it needs to be maintained, it needs to be done. And you have to carefully manage your resources to make sure that you are delivering on those programs.
Great, thanks, Steve. And now we're back to Steve K. Steve Klipin.
Thank you, Kerry P. This is another one of these really tricky issues because everything is interconnected in our little council land. But the biggest issue here that I want to offer to the people listening in and participating is my experience of a councillor is the mismatch of expectations between what we as a community would like our council to be able to do and the very limited funds that we actually have to do all the things we want to do. And so in a sense, the strategy and plans need to be connected in some way that makes sense, but they don't always make sense if we have this absolute backlog of infrastructure, a really difficult funding model because of 50% or more of our land non-rateable, and an expectation of people coming from outside of the area, and our growing expectation with a growing, with an aging population is we have a very challenging situation, certainly one that's not going to be solved in one council term to the next. So I'd be looking at building really definitively on the work that we've been doing at the moment without grandiose plans of promising everything, because nobody wants to pay more rates either. So we're dealing with that in and amongst the whole mix.
Right, thank you, Steve. And Greens.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. I acknowledge the comments Steve just made about managing expectations. I guess the number one thing we need is obviously bucket loads more money. That's the bottom line. So the strategies, I mean, the reason we've sort of supported from the economic angle the granny flat concept and infill is that it will provide more rates, and that gives us more money, and so that's sort of one of the bottom lines. But the other one is the other money issue is around changing the funding model for local government, because we don't have a fair funding model for local government. We have a very low rate base, and yet we are sustaining the oxygen for the Shire, the planet, the state, by having a very high amount of forest in our area, and that's why we love it. But it also has an economic cost. So we need to have a fairer funding model than watching the Sydney councils blow up fireworks with their grant funding that comes from our taxes, when we actually don't have the roads and infrastructure and back lanes and public toilets that we deserve, and that we will have one day if that funding model is addressed. And thirdly, there's an advocacy side to it, and that's what Dominic does all the time when he's talking to ministers, and that is part of the mayoral role and the council's role, is to just advocate and advocate and advocate for what's fair and for the resources. And the big one for us is going to be around Airbnb, that if we're infilling, we then don't want a whole heap of those becoming commercial premises. And we've made some progress in that regard, but that's obviously the big challenge, is to hold that line and improve that as we go through to infill.
Thanks, Jenny. Which brings us to the ALP.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I just want to agree with Jenny's point there, that a lot of the problem will be addressed by the increase in the rate base, with more dollars for water and sewerage. And also, as Steve mentioned, there are plans underway by the state government for council. They're not going as fast as they should, but they're at least there. Also, too, there are the new standards for housing in the area when it comes to conserving water. But my biggest issue goes back to the point of a wider issue with this council, and that's the lack of communication that comes out of council. A lot of people just don't know what they can do with the granny flats and things like that. So what we need to do is get it off the shelves and get it into the community, so people can think to get the information out there. So it is obviously an issue. There is a rate base coming through, but more people need to be aware of the opportunity rather than it sitting on the shelf down at the council chambers.
Okay, thank you, everybody. No easy answers to that one, and there's no easy answer to the next question either. We've certainly been working on it for a couple of years, and are pretty horrified about how this story is playing out. So the question is, our rental was recently put on the Airbnb platform, which meant that my family was priced out of the area. What can be done about Airbnb locally? And that question's in the chat. Yeah. And so we're starting, Steve Klipin, with you.
What can be done about Airbnb locally? Airbnb is looked after under the short-term rental by the state government. We can continue to work with the state government in the same way that the Bellingen Shire and some of the areas in Sydney have done, to limit the number of nights that are allowable. But to all intents and purposes, in this capitalist economy, the idea that somebody can use Airbnb, an Uber taxi, or get Uber Eats for food, that's part of this modern economy. I don't like it at all. And I have to admit that from time to time I have used Airbnb, and I suspect that in the forum there might be maybe 10% of the people here who have never taken an Uber or an Airbnb. Now, I don't say that in order to be obnoxious. I say that in order to see that's how challenging it is working with this new economy that is intruding into almost every way that we're living. So we need to continue to work with the way that we can to advocate, and we need to also start to do the groundwork that's required in terms of keeping the number of Airbnbs and track them, as we have started to do inside the Bellingen Shire.
Okay, thanks, Steve. And on to the Greens. I've just noticed that Dominic has had to give his apologies, as he indicated he would, and go on to another meeting. And so over to you, Jenny.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. I think that there's, obviously we need to keep advocating to have what a hosted Airbnb is look functional for us as a community. We're not Byron yet, but we're heading that way. our housing indicators show we're well on our way there. So we need to have that ability to return Airbnb to what it was designed for, which was actually quite lovely, that you could stay in someone's house and someone can make some income from their spare rooms. But if it's a fully functional separate building, then that shouldn't be considered a hosted place, because someone could live there. So that's the point that we have been advocating for, and the point that we will continue to advocate for. I guess the other part is community change. Like, there's a part that anyone who owns a property with a self-contained dwelling on it that they're not using, that they need to make the stand to say, well, actually, I want to see this community stay with the character and the colour and the guy that makes my coffee, not have to drive 2 hours to get here, because that's very much the situation facing other places. So it's really about kind of closing in on what we value and helping everyone understand that we all have a place in that.
Thanks, Jenny. Labor.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so look, this is primarily a state issue because they control state tenancy regulations, and a whole lot of work is being done or has been done in relation to state tenancy laws. And I do know for a fact that the state government has brought down a whole lot of new regulations recently on Airbnb and also properties that are listed through booking.com. The other thing too is Airbnb and booking.com is becoming less of interest to a lot of people because of the taxation implications. The ATO is really going after people now, so it will become less popular. And thirdly, the market will sort it out in that if there's too much Airbnb, then the prices of Airbnb will go down and therefore bring it on par with what people can afford in terms of housing. We're not there yet, but if we could be not too far off that place in the near future.
Thanks, Andrew. Which brings us to Waterfall Way.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. Look, I think it's very difficult to regulate in an area like this, and as Andrew quite rightly pointed out, it is mainly a state government jurisdiction. So, and I would also agree that I think the market will sort it out in general. So it's a very difficult area to really think that local government is going to be playing in that space a lot, and being able to certainly monitor it and regulate it is going to be very difficult, I believe.
So that was a pretty comprehensive response from everybody to the Airbnb question. I think our perspective is it's had a huge impact, short-term rental lettings on the private rental market, the sort of stock that people used to be able to access, converted garages, rooms that were in people's backyards. All of that's been sucked up into short-term rental. There isn't an easy answer. The lever doesn't sit in local councils' driving suite, if you like, but it certainly is a big issue for us, and we have to find a way through it somehow. Brings me to, we've got 3 more questions to go, is that right? Sorry, I'm just getting some advice. I've been given 3 more questions, but now I'm a bit confused. We've got time for 1 more question and some closing remarks. Great. So I think that the last question from this list that people from the group have nominated is a really interesting, tricky one. So we'll all be doing a few gymnastics as we think about this. What are the various candidates' policies to affect increases in wages in the LGA or the Shire? The other part of the affordability equation. Household wages are $1,218 a week on average in the Bellingen Shire versus the New South Wales average of $1,780 a week. So I'm going to read that again, and you've also got it on the chat. It's a question about, you know, the close relationship between employment and housing. We've talked about that from the perspective of not being able to retain local workers because they can't get housing. But whoever's raised this question from the floor is also raising the issue about the relationship between employment and our low median wages and affordability. What are the various candidates' policies to affect increases in wages in the LGA, the other part of the affordability equation? Household wages are $1,218 a week, it probably is the median wage in the Bellingen Shire, versus the New South Wales average of $1,780. And we're going to start with the Greens. Jennie, over to you.
Well out of the grounds of local government, but that never stops me, I must be honest. I guess that one of the big things that we've found is that we have some very poor NBN, and that limits what people can do to modernise, for want of a better word, their business or their employment opportunities. And I think we've just done it for a year through COVID. We've just done the trying to have everyone Zooming at the same time when the kids, are on Netflix is, we've had a really good testing of that. So I guess there's also that side of, there's an advocacy side, which we did a lot of work around the NBN and managed to get some fibre to the tree in the paddock removed from what was planned by the federal government. But the other thing that I think we can have a big influence in is helping people's basics have a decreased, your basic living expenses to be able to be met locally. So for me, that's really a lot about local food, and that's something we've put a lot of work into, so that we're eliminating these big corporations from a whole lot of families' needs to get their basic needs met. And there's so much work around power in the same field with the Electricity Alliance and similar prospects. So those are the sorts of things we've been involved in.
Thanks, Jennie. Over to Labor.
Okay, thanks, Kerry. So look, what we need to do is obviously, one, recognise that wages are a federal issue, but also we need to understand the atmospherics of where we live. This is the 5th poorest federal electorate in Australia, and also too, Bellingen Shire has the highest number of people living below the poverty line in Australia as a percentage of the community, and a lot of that is by choice. But also too, let's lay down a slab of honesty now, and that there's nothing can be done to increase wages to match the price of property these days. There's absolutely nothing. But what we can do is match wages to housing. We can match housing to wages so that we have more types of accommodation that people can afford, rather than trying to say, oh, we should all get an extra $200 or $300 a week so we can afford that. That's not going to happen in the short or medium term whatsoever. So what we need to do is we need to get more housing that people can afford, rather than trying to increase wages.
Thanks, Andrew. That brings us to Waterfall Way.
Obviously, I also agree that controlling wages is way out of the remit of local government. It's federal area of politics. What we can do at a local level, though, is to try and increase employment by supporting the industries that are already strong and those that may emerge within our shire. Things such as ecotourism, where there's untapped potential, I think, in this shire. With all the wonderful assets we have here, we need to find a way to convert that into opportunity for employment, for jobs, for entrepreneurialism as well. We need to support our traditional strong industry as well, such as agriculture, dairy farmers, and so on, where we can still grow further by removing obstacles to their growth, including the provision of infrastructure.
Right, thanks, Steve. Which also brings us to Steve. Klipin.
Thank you, Kerry. I'm just going to humbly say to the broader the broader audience participants that I don't have any policies that are going to deal with the issue of the increase in wages. And I say that with humility, knowing the remit, not only the remit of council, but the actual capacity of council to influence, apart from in the advocacy role and support and the kinds of things that Jennie spoke about. And that is very...
Okay, thank you. I think it's really interesting that that question was asked. It clearly wages aren't within local council remit. The federal government probably doesn't think it's in theirs either. But the thing about housing is that there are many interconnected threads at play. And I think that tonight's discussion has been a really thoughtful and considered and very well informed discussion about housing and the drivers and the things that people in this shire are facing, and the challenges that all of us, whether we're sitting around the council table or we're community advocates and thinkers trying to inform this, or we're people who are looking for somewhere to live, are facing. And I've moved into a wrap-up comment before I invite someone from each ticket to make some closing remarks. But I do want to say a real heartfelt thank you to everybody for participating and for the candidates for coming. I think it has been a pretty sophisticated discussion, actually. I don't think we would have been, as a community, able to have this discussion in this way, 5 or 6 years ago. And I think that we're doing it because we need to, and that certainly gives me some heart about what we'll be facing together. So with that, I just would like to, so what we're going to do now is invite one person from each ticket to make some closing remarks. And how long have they got for that? A minute and a half. And we're going to start with you, Labor.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Kerry. And first of all, I just want to close by saying congratulations to your organisation, the Housing Matters Action Group, for organising this, but all of the amazing work that you've done over a number of years. Secondly, I just want to say that reaffirm our commitment to financially supporting the Housing Matters Action Group to turn it into a proper NGO to progress this issue in Bellingen Shire, and not just in Bellingen, but right across Bellingen Shire, Urunga, Dorrigo and Milestone as well. The point I want to close on is to say that I'm not giving up on housing. I believe there is a role for local government when it does come to housing. To me, local government is, housing has to be one of its 4 pillars. I believe we can do something. I believe it's not just bringing people together and talking. I believe it's actually tangible work that can be done, particularly when it comes to planning policy and providing incentives, not only to get housing happening, but to bring people here for jobs or grow jobs and get the wages going as well. But the most important thing we have to do, is get these reports off the shelf, and we have to get some action happening. There's so much going on in the housing space in Bellingen Shire, but it's not just getting out the door of the council chambers, and that will be my number one priority. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. And thanks to Paul also for participating tonight. That brings us to Waterfall Way.
Well, thanks again, Kerry, and I'd like to echo the thoughts and thanks about the work that Housing Matters Action Group have done. I do believe that there is a lot of potential for local government, for Bellingen Shire, to continue to work in partnership with the other tiers of government. I think it's important that you have very clear and open communication channels for that to happen with those tiers of government. So working with the private sector and not-for-profits around the affordable housing issue is the way I see the local government participating in this space. Advocacy is still going to be the main way to go. There has to be some more work done around planning and the removal of barriers around development proposal so that there is an increase in supply, because that is still, it's the traditional method, but it's still a valid method of making housing more affordable as well by increasing supply. What I won't be a party to is the imposition of any new levy. Hasn't been mentioned, but I'm saying it now that we wouldn't agree to the imposition of any new levy to being imposed on contributions to fund this. So whatever partnerships we do go into agreement with have to stand from the funding that comes from state and federal level.
Thanks, Steve. And that brings us to Steve Klipin. You're on mute, Steve.
My heartfelt thanks to you, Kerry, and to the organisation that you have been so much a part in steering over the last many, many years, and the heartfelt thanks that this issue can now exist as an issue in and of itself, rather than something tangential to a council conversation and dialogue, and that is really a mighty achievement. It's only the first step of the achievement, because as I've been listening to the questions and reading the questions and the responses, is that I note that there's a lot of interest, a lot of worry and anxiety that is amongst the people living in our shire. And that worry and anxiety is about housing stress. It's about money. It's about, can we provide for our children? It's all the things that actually make us a community. And I would like to be part of a council that understands that has an empathy and an understanding for that and to work together with community in an enthusiastic and innovative and results-focused way, so that together we come up with the best answers, because there is no simple single answer to any of this. But I believe when we come together, we've got more of a chance of getting more of the answers right.
Thanks, Steve. And that brings us to the Greens as we wrap up. Jennie.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. Yeah, as everyone said, I'm immensely proud of the way that our community gets stuck in partnerships over so many really tricky issues. I think we do amazing work, and so, you know, obviously I'm super proud of the Housing Matters Action Group, and have loved seeing it form and the directions it's taken and all the energy so many people have brought to it. You know, we have this intense intelligence in our community and this huge range of experience, and the way that we bring that to our problems is, it always hits me here. It always hits me here, because there's been so many of these big issues that we've tackled together, rather than all the finger pointing of someone's got to solve it, because ultimately we only get the chance to create community each day and in the choices we make, and that includes whether you have a granny flat that's on Airbnb. You get to create community. You can't buy into it. You can't be born into it. You have to create it every day. So I think that while while it's not a part of council's kind of remit, there's these things that fundamentally underpin our community. And while we're here to represent legislation and things and decision making, what we're really here to do is to represent community. And so if something is fundamental and it's outside the council boundary, we can't just ignore it. We have to have a role in that. And whether that's there's so many tools. It might not be motions, it might not be council spending money, but it might be the way you change the language, you change the discussion, you take the opportunities. So from climate change, food, housing, social justice issues, we have to participate in that. So yeah, new ideas and always done better.
Thanks, Jennie. And heartfelt thanks to all of you for your comments and your participation tonight, and to the people who stayed the course with us. We started with 65 registrations. We're down to 34, so I think we've lost people as we've gone along, but we've got a hardcore who've stayed with us, and we're going to make this available on our website for people who want to catch up who couldn't stay. And I think it's been a really valuable discussion as we move towards the 4th of December. I want to take us out just by reading a comment I've just seen in the chat from someone who was really involved in the group when we first set up. And I want to take a minute to say this is a big group. There's a number of people who are involved, and there's a number of people. I often am the front person, but there's a really hard-working core of people who meet as a team and are doing this work together. And we didn't tonight, deliberately didn't talk about homelessness and crisis housing because that deserves a forum of its own. But there are people in the Shire who are facing these issues of being out of their cars or on the beach on a daily basis. So I just want to read Reverend Zoe's comment as a way that takes us out. Thank you, panellists, for your input, and thank you, hosts, for organising this and all the hard work that you've done over the past few years. And I add my thanks to the people in this room for all of the hard, techie work that we've just done in the last hour or so. Reverend Zoe says, sadly, we didn't have the time to talk about the current issues of the crisis. That is, people sleeping in their cars and tents because there's nowhere affordable to live. It will take a number of years to address the affordable housing infrastructure, and in the meantime, many people will continue to hurt. Please don't forget the need for more emergency accommodation. And I would add to that, let's not forget the need that we need to find many solutions to this problem. There isn't just one. And it's not just one level of government, and it's also about us. So thank you very much. Really appreciate and hope that you all got something out of tonight. Thanks. Bye-bye.